a member of the Board of Trustees. I want to welcome members and friends, visitors and guests to the Thomas Jefferson Unitarian Church. Wherever you come from religiously, wherever you are and wherever you might be going, you are welcome here. Our members are challenged to examine and redefine, according to their own conscience, personal beliefs by which to lead lives of purpose and service. Our goal is to build a community of open hearts, inquiring minds, and helping hands. If you are a visitor with us today, we invite you to contact our membership coordinator, Janet Taylor, and receive our newsletter and email updates. Contact information for Janet is on our church website. And please visit our TJUC Facebook page. Please join us after the worship service for what we call coffee chat. Bring the beverage of your choice and you will be broken into small groups online, and you'll be able to check in with each other and have a good conversation. I have 3 announcements this morning. Because the pandemic shows little sign of letting up, we now think that we should hold our name change vote online. We will hold a special congregational meeting on Sunday, July 12th at 1 p.m. by way of Zoom for that purpose. And you'll see more information about that very soon. Secondly, the board met in a special session to consider the opening of various elements of our church life. We decided that we would not open the sanctuary for Sunday services at least until the beginning of the new church year in August. We will evaluate the possibility as new information comes in, but whatever we do, we will adhere to state and CDC guidelines and recommendations. And finally, please know that members of the First Unitarian Church will be peacefully protesting and social distancing at the corner of 4th Street and York Street today at 12:30 in support of Black Lives Matters. We are invited to join in support of our Black brothers and sisters with masks and signs. So with that, let us now return to the sanctuary.
Good morning. Good morning to New Normal, and I'm sure we'll have a whole lot more of these new normals. Today's reading is from Betsy Winch, and it's May This Flower. And I'll be lighting the chalice today. My name is Cedric Saunders. May this flame, symbol of transformation since time begun, fire our curiosity, strengthen our wills, and add and sustain courage as we seek what is good within and around us.
Good morning. My name is Hope Howell, and I'm one of the members of the Settled Ministry Search Committee. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker service person tonight. His name is Reverend Keith Kron. He's the director of the Transitions Office for the UUA, which means he helps congregations and ministers help them navigate their through the ministerial search process. He is the former director of the Office of Bisexual, Gay, Lesbian, and Transgendered Concerns for the Unitarian Universalist Association. He held that position for 14 years, from 1996 to 2010. It's interesting that he has personally visited over 450 UU congregations across the continent, helping them in the welcoming congregation work, beyond categorical thinking workshops, and public witness. He is a former elementary school teacher from Lexington, Kentucky. Keith also has taught an online class for Star King School for the Ministry and UU Seminary in Berkeley on children's literature. He also leads workshops and the Enneagram, plays and teaches tennis, collects children's books, and he's known to have around 8,500 books in his library. And without further ado, welcome, Keith.
It is good to be with you all. I am Disappointed I cannot be with you in person back in Kentucky, one of my home states, but I'm glad I can be with you this morning for worship. Our opening words this morning come from the Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Robert Fulgham. To be human is to be religious. To be religious is to be mindful. To be mindful is to pay attention. And to pay attention is to sanctify existence. May our time together in worship this morning be a time to sanctify the existence of our lives and of life around us. Our time for all ages is done with the help of my friend Penny, the dinosaur. This is her story. This is one of the newer books in my collection. It's by Ryan Higgins, and a children's literature author from Maine. If he's not a Unitarian Universalist, he should be. And the title of his book is We Don't Eat Our Classmates. This is the story of Penelope. Penelope Rex was nervous. It's not every day a new little T-Rex starts school. What are my classmates going to be like, she wondered. Will they be nice? How many teeth will they have? These questions were very important to Penelope. Penelope's mom bought her a new backpack with ponies on it. Ponies were Penelope's favorite because ponies are delicious. And Penelope's dad packed her a lunch of 300 tuna fish sandwiches and 1 box of apple juice. And finally, the big day came. And Penelope Rex was very surprised to find out that all of her classmates were children. So she ate them. Because children are delicious. Penelope Rex, said her teacher, Mrs. Noodleman, we don't eat our classmates. Please spit them out at once. So she did. It was not the best way to start school. Still, Penelope was determined to have a good first day. She tried to make friends at recess, but being at the bottom of the slide with her mouth open didn't win her any new friends. She finger painted some of her best work, but her picture of her eating a person did not actually, again, make her popular with friends. She saved Griffin Emery a seat at lunch, but he chose not to sit with her. Even when she said to him, you can sit here. Penelope started to notice that everyone else was making friends but her, and it was lonely. When she got home, her dad asked her about her first day of school. I didn't make any friends, Penelope cried. None of the children wanted to play with me. Penelope Rex, her father asked, did you eat your classmates? Well, maybe, just a little bit, sort of. Sometimes it's hard to make friends, said her dad, especially if you eat them. You see, Penelope, children are just the same as us on the inside, only tastier. And this gave Penelope a lot to think about. The next day, Penelope tried really hard. But poor Penelope. She could not stop herself from eating her classmates. Mrs. Noodleman and Penelope ate William Amoto again, and all the students were afraid of her, except for Walter. Walter was the class goldfish. So Penelope decided to try and make friends with him. Will you be my friend, she said. And with that, she put her finger into the fishbowl, and Walter immediately went chomp and bit her finger. Eee, cried Penelope, he's eating my finger, wah! And she danced around crying. Once again, Penelope found out what it was. Once Penelope found out what it was like to be someone's snack, she lost her appetite for children. She stopped eating her classmates, even when Cece Woodman spilled barbecue sauce all over herself. And soon, Penelope began to make friends. Now, even when the children look especially delicious, she peeks at Walter and remembers what it's like when someone tries to eat you. And Walter the goldfish stares back and he licks his lips. Because children and dinosaurs are delicious. And maybe we can move to a time when we think of everyone as a classmate for all of us on this journey of life. Thus endeth the children time.
Good morning again. Today, we will be conducting our first online share play collection for Louisville Grows. Louisville Grows is a remarkable organization which empowers Louisville neighborhoods to increase their tree canopy and to make a positive impact on their health. Over the past several years, many TJ volunteers have volunteered at Louisville Grows, planting trees, canvassing neighborhoods, and feeding volunteers. You choose Louisville Grows to be our recipient of today's Share to Play collections. To donate, please go to the TJ web and click donate. Instructions are on the click. Also, on May 28th, Deborah Horvey had an email with the instructions. Please welcome a very energetic Jacquelyn Eklund, Program Manager of Louisville Grows, who will tell us about their program and activities.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on this beautiful Sunday. Yeah, as you said, my name is Jacquelyn Eklund. I am the program manager at Louisville Grows. And I know a lot of you already know some things about Louisville Grows, but very quickly I'm gonna give you a brief overview of who we are and what we do. Our mission statement is to grow greener and healthier communities. And we do that in a lot of ways. But the main pillars we work under are encouraging and engaging communities to work in urban forestry and to plant trees, supporting community gardens and local food access, and also health and environmental education. And we have been around for about 9 years, and we generally work in we have 21 different target neighborhoods, and these are based on several different factors. These neighborhoods are in Southwest and Central Louisville mainly, and is based both on need, whether it is a lack of a healthy tree canopy, or by socioeconomics. Basically, we're trying to work in neighborhoods that have less access to the resources to plant trees. And our main goal in that is to empower them and help them grow their own capacity for planting trees. We do plant about 1,000 trees a year. We also give away about 1,000 trees a year. So we're very proud of our work doing that and planting trees. But an important note is that Louisville is losing 50,000 trees a year. So what we do is a drop in the bucket in regards to number of trees. But the most important thing we do is the community engagement. Our goal is to work with neighborhoods to get people excited about planting trees, to have these conversations. Like me coming here and talking to you is my favorite part of my job, because I love seeing groups like your church becoming involved and engaged in the communities we work in. And I think that's really important. I know Lori McDougall has worked with me a lot, and I love working with her. And she sent me an email yesterday of all the people who volunteered with us. And I had no clue. I mean, we've had people do door knocking and canvassing. We've had people help serve lunch at tree plantings. In that, in my mind, is the focus and the most important thing we do. And I would love all of you to be involved with us in various ways. We do large tree planting events, but we also, and there's a lot of roles in that we need help with. We need people to help with the registration. We need people to help with serving lunch, actually planting the trees, and also canvassing neighborhoods and having the same conversation I'm having with you with residents in neighborhoods that need trees. So I'm going to drop a few links in the chat to everyone. One is my email. It's trees@louisvillegrows.org. And one is our volunteer coordinator's email. It's volunteer@louisvillegrows.org. And I'll also just put our program director's email in there as well. I know that I also wanted to thank you guys because I know we have received some donations from you. I think we had almost $500 donated from members of your church and from you all. And that has a very real impact on our tree plantings. It allows us to plant an extra, like for every $100 we can plant an extra tree. That is the cost of a tree to us. So thank you so much for your donations in the past. And I look forward to hopefully hearing from some of you and and seeing you out and about and helping us. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Good morning. My name is Dawn Moretz, and I'm also part of the Settled Minister Search Committee. It's my honor to be able to sing the special music this morning. And originally it was chosen because of so many reasons prior to the events that occurred this past week. We are going through a time of change within our church as we search for a new minister. We're going through a time of change depending on whether or not we come with a new name for the church itself. We're in a time of pandemic where many things have changed in our lives. And so I chose the song Turn, Turn, Turn. However, with the events that took place beginning this past Monday and throughout this weekend, I feel that the words are probably even more meaningful. So please listen and take whatever symbolism you care to choose. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to love, a time to weep. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time of love, a time of hate, a time of war, a time of peace, a time you may embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to gain, a time to lose, a time to friend, a time to sow, a time of love, a time of hate, a time of peace. I swear it's not too late. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. And now, we're very blessed to hear from our guest speaker today, Keith Kron.
Thank you, Dawn. That was lovely. Our first reading this morning comes from Emily Bernard, an African-American woman, from her book, Black is in the Body. Over 25 years ago, she was in a coffee house when a young man with mental health issues came into the coffee house and began stabbing people. This is how she remembers the violence on the night that she was stabbed. I did experience terrible pain on the night of August 7th. The person responsible for it was the surgeon on call. I lay on a gurney, feeling helpless and afraid. The surgeon walked over and, without saying a word to me or even looking in my direction, plunged his fingers into my gaping knife wound. I gasped and I instinctively grabbed his hand. It was only then that the man looked at me and said icily, "Don't touch my hand." His eyes were Aryan blue and as cold as his voice. I asked questions about what was happening, and he refused to respond. Only the attending nurses treated me with any kindness or respect. Whenever I tell the story of the night I got stabbed, I always say the person who did the most injury to me, who left the deepest wounds, was not the young man who stabbed me, Daniel Silva, but it was the surgeon. The second reading is a story from my own life a little earlier this year, and it's entitled Unclenching. It was a nearly perfect day for a summer walk. I wasn't alone. My favorite sighting on my street was a woman walking her adorable French bulldog down the street. I heard her say, "Good boy, Luke," several times as she pulled slightly on the leash to keep Luke from being too distracted. Around the corner comes a man with a pit bull. And Luke, the French bulldog, immediately goes stock still. But the pit bull is wagging her tail with the greatest of hope and charm, clearly excited about the possibility of a new friend. And she'd won me over. The woman tries to get Luke to move forward in vain because the bulldog is playing statue. Eventually, the man with the pit bull reaches the woman and her dog, and if possible, the French bulldog gets even stiffer. The woman is trying to comfort Luke, telling her it'll be okay, and the pit bull sniffs hopefully and inquisitively at her new wished-for friend. And then, in an instant, Luke relaxes and sniffs back. And quickly, their tails are all wagging as they sniff and nuzzle and snort. And I notice the owners have relaxed and have unclenched, and they are now talking amiably, though near as I can tell, their tails are not a-wagging with the same veracity as their pets. It's only then that I realized that I had been clenching, and I now feel my body relax. I left the happy foursome and headed off, thinking how much a metaphor this has become for today's times, how we all seem to be living lives of trepidation, and yet hope and kindness are out there if we look beyond stereotypes, if we present ourselves with kindness, if we just try. I think about the reputation that pit bulls have, and yet she was the kindest of all. Maybe in these trying and difficult times, we need to be a little bit more like the pit bull in whatever ways we can, offering a little hope and kindness to any new friend we could possibly meet. Of course, in these days, in these moments, we're all thinking about harm and violence. We have seen great harm come in our country these last few days. I have been thinking about harm and violence in so many ways, and I've been thinking for about a while in terms of what is the role of religion in our lives. And it made me think recently when I was visiting the city of Pittsburgh, just after a gunman had walked into the synagogue, and not long after, another sex scandal had broken out in the Catholic Church, that I had found myself ruminating on the question, why should we trust religion at all? But then I'm reminded of our opening words from Robert Fulghum, where he says to be human is to be religious, to ask religious questions. And that if we are religious, we will be mindful, and if we are mindful, we will pay attention. And if we pay attention, we will sanctify existence. Exactly what our world needs more of. I was also recently at 2 trainings for ministers, and these were people who were new ministers, and I asked them to think about, what does a congregation need from its minister? Something you all will be asking yourselves as you go into the ministerial search. And I asked them to create a chart of what a congregation needs, similar to the Maslow chart, where you put the basic needs at the bottom and then higher needs at the top. I was intrigued with the responses because they've had the typical things. Congregations want good preaching. They want someone to make pastoral care. They want someone to have a prophetic voice. But what intrigued me about what they said was what they actually did not say. Not a single person said the basic need for any minister serving a congregation is to do no harm. The next basic need for a congregation is for a minister to build trust within the congregation. And I thought about the fact that I'd done this exercise twice with several new ministers. And then it also had occurred to me, I'd never seen a search committee say this was a basic need of theirs either, as if it were implied. And yet I think given the state of the world today, we need to talk about how important things like doing no harm and building trust actually are. And how do we build and rebuild trust in religion? How do we as Unitarian Universalists show up to ourselves and to the wider world? You know, given this moment of national tragedy, I'm thinking of my own visit some 22 years ago, following the tragic death of Matthew Shepard, when I went to Wyoming to represent Unitarian Universalism, only one of 2 religions at that time willing to send a representative in response to that particularly hate-filled moment. And I remembered I showed up at that morning to preach to be at the congregation because the minister had asked me to say a few words. He too was a brand new minister. And he had said, I will say a few things, read some letters that we had gotten, and then I'll ask you to say a moment worth of things just to be a national presence. And I had agreed to do that. So the minister got up, read a couple of letters that were said, turned to me and said, and now Reverend Keith Kron will deliver the sermon this morning. I tried not to look startled. I don't remember if I was able to pull that off. I do remember that I said some things that I no longer remember. But I remember that it was most important for me just to be there with the people of the congregation. A little later, we went to the site where Matthew Shepard had been left, where he had been tied to a fence and left to die. We'd agreed we were going to lay some flowers next to the fence and to take a moment of silence to remember Matthew. So the brand new minister put some flowers next to the fence, turned to me and said, and now Reverend Keith Kron will lead the memorial service for Matthew Shepard. Again, I don't remember what I said, but later when I asked him why this had all happened, that this was not what we agreed to, he said, I was scared, I'm brand new, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, we often find ourselves in moments where we don't know what to do. But it is important that we are together with one another, that we can find comfort in trust, in community with each other. And that Unitarian Universalism can be a place to build this trust. It was just somewhat months later when I was the guest preacher outside of Denver, Colorado, at our congregation in Littleton, Colorado, the congregation closest to Columbine Senior High School, the congregation now having its first guest minister just some 3 weeks after the high school shooting had happened. And I walked into that sanctuary that morning, and I was reminded what hope from Unitarian Universalism could look like. Because I walked into the sanctuary that morning and surrounded on every wall, every congregant could read and see letters and pictures from Unitarian Universalist children in our religious education programs who had wanted to express their wishes of care and love to the people of the Littleton congregation as they were going through this. And I was reminded what a place of hope that we can be. That is important that we just show up and be together. I think about the researcher Brene Brown, and she talks about trust. And she talks about how trust is built in the little moments, the little things we do. And that made me think about if trust is built in the little moments, it can also be broken in the little moments. And that called me back to seminary when I was sitting in a class on death and dying. And I learned so much about ministry during that class. And it was after the class that I was talking with the dean of our school and the teacher, a Holocaust survivor who worked with young people who were contemplating suicide. And we talked about how violence happens not only in the wider world, but how it happens in between people and how we need to do that. And the teacher said, we just had that happen in our class. And she looked at me and smiled, and I nodded. And she told the story of the day where we practiced all being hospital chaplains to a man in a hospital who could not move, who could barely speak. And we were to be a hospital chaplain going and visiting them for the first time. One of the students volunteered, went over to the patient's bed and took his hand. And it was that point, Anna, the professor, immediately stood up and said as loudly as she could to the student, please do not ever do that again. And all of us immediately turned and looked at Anna. And she looked back at us and said, I want you to think about this person in this moment, this patient he has absolutely no control over his life. And without asking him, you have taken away more control by just simply taking his hand. How different that interaction would have been if you had asked first, could I take your hand? Would that be comfortable? You had no idea if taking his hand was going to cause him more pain or if it was going to make him feel out of control. And we all learned a lot in that particular moment. And I see this happen so often in our UU congregations. I was talking with a friend of mine who was visiting his son in Cleveland. And he and his son and two of his son's friends, his son and his two friends are all in their mid to late 20s, were going from the west side of Cleveland to a Cleveland baseball game. And they passed the Unitarian congregation on the west side of Cleveland. And as they passed, they saw on the outside of the building a huge Black Lives Matter banner, a huge banner proclaiming that they were a welcoming congregation. And immediately, the three young friends, none of whom were Unitarian Universalists, started talking about how if they were going to go to church, this would be the church they wanted to go to, because this was a church concerned about making a difference in the world. And I thought about that, and I hoped it was true. And I wondered what would happen if they showed up wanting to make a difference, being told as 20 people in their 20s that they were welcome. But would it come like with a caveat like so many congregations have? You are more than welcome to come in as a 25-year-old in our congregation, as long as you act like the 60 and 70-year-olds in our congregation, as long as you give like the 60 and 70-year-olds in our congregation, as long as you sit on 8 or 9 committees like the 60 and 70-year-olds in our congregation. Would they be welcomed as who they are, or would they have the same expectations? We often also do this for our people of color, where people come in and they are asked amazing things like, would you want to serve on the board? I was talking with someone who was asked if they would serve on their board on their second visit to a congregation. On the other hand, I was talking to a colleague of mine, a Unitarian Universalist minister, who'd showed up at a congregation one morning dressed in a suit, carrying his sermon, walked in the building. The greeter said hello and asked him, are you here to clean the building this morning? And having been in over 450 of our congregations, I know that I have never showed up anywhere having been asked if I was there to clean the building. We have congregations who want to do litmus tests over theology to make sure that you fit in. We even had one congregation want to declare itself a completely humanist congregation, that this was the only theology of the congregation. It did not pass, but I wonder, what harm can we do to the people who come in to visit our congregation? We can be as rigid and violent as the fundamentalists we try to be not like from the religious right. Maybe sometimes we do eat our classmates. This could be a golden moment for Unitarian Universalism. Can we reach out to the people who need us, who want to come to a place where people of all races, sexual orientations, ages, theologies are welcome in our congregation? Or will we be a congregation trying to circle the wagons and become smaller? I've even asked some of our congregations in ministerial search these questions, and I phrased it kind of with this outlook. Do you want a minister who will serve all people? Or is what you really need a hospice chaplain who will just serve a smaller group of people who continually keep people out? It's a question I think all of our congregations and all of religion should be asking each other. The Nigerian author Chimamanda Adichie, which we talked about yesterday in the Beyond Categorical Thinking workshop, talked about the danger of the single story. And she says a single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. And how a stereotype makes one story the only story. And will we, as a faith, allow ourselves to be more than a single story, an only story, Will we commit little acts of violence as we try and make one story our story, or can we expand who we are and really honor the diversity that we really want? How do we unclench? How do we do no harm? How do we pay attention? How do we sanctify existence? How do we be religious? And how do we honor this diversity? I was talking again with the dean of the seminary that I went to, and he was telling me the story of sitting with the other deans of the other theological schools. And he and his friend, the dean from the American Baptist School, were at complete opposite sides of what they believed. And they were trying to have a meeting where they were going to decide what to do. And Bob, our dean, finally said, you know, I'm really intrigued because Jim and I have our opinions. We disagree. We will be friends after this meeting. But I am more interested in hearing what you all believe than you're trying to help us come together. And I wonder, as I think about that story, how do we not run from diversity? How do we find that we can be strengthened by having viewpoints that disagree with each other, of having different experiences? A final story, and then I will close. This is a story from when I had just started at the Unitarian Universalist Association some 25 years ago. I'd been asked to go to a conference on religion, gender, and sexuality, where some representatives from 40 different denominations were there to have a conversation. And on the first day, I found myself on this long dais of 40 people sitting next to John from the Church of Christ and from Mark from the Church of God. And in those days, it was a time when we were passing the microphone around to introduce ourselves. And John from the Church of Christ introduces himself. Hi, my name is John. I'm from the Church of Christ, and I am to the right of the right. And everyone laughs, he smiles, and he hands me the microphone. And I go, hi, my name is the Reverend Keith Kron. I'm the director of the Office of Bisexual, Gay, Lesbian, and Transgender Concerns from the UUA, at which point I have to stop talking because John and Mark are scooting their chairs away from me out of fear. And finally, when they stop and I say, and I am here, and we are to the left of the left on these issues. We spent 4 days talking about all issues regarding gender, religion, and sexuality. We found ourselves in constant disagreement with each other. And then the last day, John and Mark and two of his friends, probably named Matthew and Luke, came up to me and said, we would like to have lunch with you. And I thought, this will be fun. But I agreed to meet with them for lunch. So we gathered that day on the last day of the conference for lunch. And John and Mark and Matthew and Luke sat next to me. And Mark said, we want you to know that we have listened to every single thing that you have said. And we wanted you to know that we have disagreed very strongly with every word that has come out of your mouth. But we also wanted you to know that we respect you, because at least you are clear about what you believe. And that is something that we can honor. And that moment, those 4 people were my teachers. I learned something that day about being in disagreement with someone other and being able to be with them. The funny aside to this is that one of them asked me after that if I knew anything about football, and they were somewhat shocked to learn that I knew more about football than all 4 of them, having worked my way through college as a football referee. It was a good conversation where we got to be classmates with each other, where we did not eat each other. And that is my wonderment for Unitarian Universalism. Can we be a place of hope and trust? Can we be a place that builds it? How do we celebrate difference and expand upon it? My hope is that we can rebuild our faith, that we can be clear without being rigid, that we can be a place where we can all be together as classmates on this journey, and be a place where the future of our religion is to sanctify existence of all those around us. Amen. Our closing words today, I've changed them. They come from 3 different people. The first is from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. The second comes from Michelle Obama. You may live in the world as it is, but you can still work to create the world as it should be. There's a grace in being willing to know and hear others. And our final quote is from Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. As we leave this worship this morning, may you remember these words from these fine people. May you go in peace. May you go in love. May you work for justice. May you go forth and bless the world. Amen.
Well, church, I hope that you remember to forgive, love, and understand yourself as you forgive, love, and understand the others in our lives. And with that, thank you.